Have you ever felt that universal human quest for meaning? You know, that deep desire to escape suffering or maybe just find a clearer path through life?
Yeah, absolutely. And what if you could find like a shortcut to ancient wisdom, a way to get the core insights without wading through incredibly dense texts?
Exactly. That's what we try to do here on the deep dive. We take complex sources, articles, research, maybe even your own notes, and pull out the key nuggets, the important stuff, just for you, our listener.
And today we're digging into The Ideas and Meditative Practices of Early Buddhism by Tilmann Vetter. It's a fascinating look.
Our mission today is really to unpack the core ideas of early Buddhism. We want to explore how it developed, because it's surprisingly complex, isn't it? And find those moments that just make you go, aha.
It really is
Yes.
complex. And the text itself highlights a huge challenge right away.
Yeah.
How do we know what the Buddha actually said versus what came later? You know, interpretations, additions.
That's a core problem, yeah.
And it's not just us asking. Even early Buddhists were aware of this. The source mentions this interesting line: all that has been well spoken is the Buddha's word.
What does that imply?
Well, it shows that powerful ideas, once they were accepted, kind of got attributed back to the founder. It tells you something fundamental about how these traditions grow and change. They're alive, not static.
Okay, so keeping that challenge in mind, our journey today sounds pretty interesting. We're going to look at the Buddha's own path first.
Yep, his path to enlightenment. Then we'll see how that branched out into different ways to find salvation.
And track how concepts like karma evolved. That sounds key. Plus this other, maybe more radical perspective you mentioned.
Exactly. It offers some really fresh ways to think about spiritual journeys, personal responsibility, all that.
All right, let's dive in. Where do we start? The Buddha's own story.
Yeah, let's start with a really pivotal moment for Gautama, the historical Buddha. After years of really extreme practices, self-mortification, trying to find truth through hardship,
Right, pushing the body to its absolute limit.
he suddenly remembered something from his childhood. The texts describe him sitting quietly under a jambu tree and recalling this state of joy and happiness accompanied by contemplation and reflection.
Not like everyday pleasure, though.
No, no, definitely not. This was a deep internal kind of bliss, totally separate from, worldly distractions or difficult emotions, just pure inner peace.
Wow. And that memory was the spark.
That was it. It made him think, could this be the way? This state of inner calm. But he had obstacles.
Kind of obstacles.
Well, first, there was this strong prejudice among ascetics back then that salvation only comes through pain, through suffering. Happiness was seen as, well, suspect.
So he had to overcome that mindset.
And second, his own physical condition. He was weak from all the extreme fasting. He needed to nourish himself, embrace this non-sensual kind of happiness. That unlocked the path.
And this path became what we now call dhyana-meditation, those stages.
Exactly, those stages of deep absorption. The first dhyana was basically that remembered state. Joy, happiness, still some thinking, but free from desire.
Okay.
Then, in the second dhyana, the thinking mind starts to quiet down. Contemplation stops. You get this inner calm, this oneness of heart, and the joy and happiness now come purely from concentration, from samadhi.
Deeper still?
Yep, third dhyana. Here, even that intense joy fades away. It's replaced by this profound equanimity, like a deep balance and sharp awareness. Still some subtle physical ease, though.
And the final stage.
The fourth dhyana, that's described as the highest state. Perfect equanimity and awareness. Totally free from both happiness and pain, just pure, clear awareness. The Buddha apparently felt this was his unique discovery, this profound purity.
That's quite a journey inward, but you mentioned earlier the text suggests his initial breakthrough, his enlightenment, wasn't really about a set of beliefs or dogmas.
That's a really key point from the text, yeah. It seems it was more of an experience, an unformulated feeling of achieving immortality, amata, freedom from death, personified as Mara.
So not primarily about stopping suffering, as it's often framed later.
Apparently not, initially. More about transcending mortality itself. Which raises a big question, right? If the core experience is kind of wordless, how do you teach that? How does it become a path for other people?
Good point. How did he bridge that gap, according to Vetter?
Well, the text suggests that while dhyana meditation was the heart of his teaching, he quickly realized just talking about his experience wasn't enough. People couldn't just replicate it easily.
So he needed a more structured approach.
Exactly. And that's where the Noble Eightfold Path comes in. It seems to have developed as a way to prepare people, to guide them towards the state needed for dhyana.
So the path is like the training ground for the main event, which is dhyana or samadhi.
Pretty much, yeah. The text basically equates right samadhi, the eighth part of the path, with those higher dhyana states.
Okay, so what did that preparation involve? The path includes things like...
Right views, right resolve. So right views meant things like believing in an afterlife, believing the Buddha's path actually worked. Right resolve often meant leaving home, becoming a monk or nun.
practical life changes.
Very practical. Then you have right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, basically. The ethical rules. Don't harm, don't lie, live simply, often by begging.
And right effort, right mindfulness.
Right effort was about actively guarding your senses, not getting overwhelmed by impressions. And right mindfulness, well, that's about being fully present, aware of every action, every sensation, right here, right now.
What strikes me reading this is how internal it all is. These aren't just external rules you follow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were designed to cultivate inner states. The ethical conduct leads to a kind of flawless happiness. Controlling the senses brings non-sensual happiness. Mindfulness creates deep awareness.
And these states are the foundation needed to actually enter dhyana.
That's what the source argues, yes. They create the necessary inner calm and clarity. And it's interesting, the motivation wasn't just for yourself, but also framed as for the welfare of all living creatures.
Okay, so we have the dhyana experience and the Eightfold Path as preparation. Then come the Four Noble Truths. How do they fit in?
This is where it gets really interesting conceptually. The text presents the Four Noble Truths, suffering, its cause, its end, and the path to its end, almost like a theoretical framework.
How so?
Like a doctor's diagnosis.
Yeah.
You know, here's the illness, suffering, here's what causes it, craving, here's the possibility of cure, cessation, and here's the medicine, the Eightfold Path. It suggests this was a later, more structured way of explaining the core insights.
Right. And the cause is identified specifically as craving, tanham.
Yes, tanha. And it's got three flavors: craving for pleasures, craving for existence itself, and even craving for non-existence, wanting things to end.
In nirvana, the goal is defined how?
Two main ways here.
Yeah.
One, it's the destruction of desire, hate, and confusion, the root problems. Two, it's the ceasing of rebirth, breaking that cycle.
Now, you mentioned something about how the Buddha's enlightenment was described in relation to these truths, like a revision.
Yeah, and in some accounts, like the first sermon, his full enlightenment is described as realizing these truths in three ways: knowing what they are, knowing what needed to be done about them, and knowing it had been done. The text suggests this might be a later framing, a reinterpretation of enlightenment as achieving this complete theoretical understanding, removing all doubt, rather than just the initial raw experience of release itself.
Why do that? Why reframe it? Any ideas?
Well, perhaps it was to make the path clearer, to provide a more intellectual, systematic map for followers. Maybe the raw experience was too hard to convey directly, so this framework helped people grasp the problem and the solution logically.
That makes sense. Okay, so that's one major path, but there was another one mentioned, discriminating insight, panyan.
Yes, panya or pranya, a different approach, really focused on wisdom and understanding.
How does that work?
It focuses on deeply understanding that what we usually think of as ourself, our body, feelings, thoughts, identity, can't really be the self.
What?
Because it's all impermanent. It changes, it arises, it passes away, and anything impermanent is ultimately unsatisfactory, a source of suffering, dukkha. So if it's impermanent and causes suffering, how can it be your true, unchanging self?
The logic is impermanent suffering, not self.
Exactly. This involves analyzing the person into 5 components, the 5 constituents, or skandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. You examine each one and see. It's fleeting, it's unreliable, therefore, this is not mine, this is not myself.
It's a process of disidentification, letting go of clinging to these things as me.
Precisely. And the key thing, according to this source, is that the original aim was purely practical.
How so?
Texts like the Discourse on Non-Self seem focused entirely on achieving freedom from clinging, freedom from desire, and ultimately, freedom from rebirth. Get free by seeing things as they are.
So not getting bogged down in philosophy.
Right. The Buddha famously didn't answer purely metaphysical questions like, does the self exist or not exist after death? He saw them as a distraction from the real work of liberation. Experience over speculation.
That's a powerful focus. But this no self idea, Anatta, it raises questions, doesn't it? Like, if there's no self, who gets liberated? Who benefits?
Absolutely. And the text suggests the later, more developed Anatta theory was partly a logical reaction to exactly that problem. How do you explain salvation without a persistent soul or self?
It's a paradox.
A huge one. There's this incredible verse quoted from a later text, the Visuddhimagga, that really captures it. Only suffering exists, no person who suffers. There's no agent, only an action. Nirvana exists, but no person who is extinguished. A path exists, but no person going on it.
Wow. That really turns your head inside out and emphasizes the processes, not a permanent entity undergoing them.
Exactly. Actions, experiences, suffering, liberation, they happen, but without a fixed doer or experiencer behind them.
Okay, besides dhyana insight, the text mentions another type of meditation, sphere meditation.
Yes, leading to the formless attainments. This seems a bit different, maybe more artificial as the text puts it.
What are these formless states?
They move beyond ordinary perception. Stages like experiencing the infinity of space, then the infinity of perception or consciousness itself, then a state of nothingness, and finally this incredibly subtle state called neither perception nor non-perception.
Sounds very abstract, very deep. Where did this come from?
It seems likely these practices originated in other non-Buddhist mystical traditions that were around at the time, and they were later absorbed and adapted within Buddhism.
So Buddhism was integrating techniques from its environment.
It looks that way. For instance, some early texts talk about perception almost as this subtle thing that could transmigrate, maybe even a cosmic principle. That sounds like an older idea that got reinterpreted through a Buddhist lens.
And the ultimate goal of this sphere meditation path.
It culminates in the cessation of perception and feeling, a state where essentially all mental processing, all feeling just stops.
Stops completely.
That's the description. The text suggests this was a specifically Buddhist innovation, seen as a direct foretaste of nirvana itself, a state beyond all mental and physical suffering because the very processes that create them have ceased.
What does that even mean experientially? A state without any mental activity? It's hard to imagine.
It really is. It pushes the boundaries of what we consider consciousness.
Let's shift gears a bit to karma. It's a concept many people associate with Buddhism, but you said it evolved.
Yes, significantly. Initially, it seems the Buddha worked with the common Indian idea of the time. Do good deeds, you get reborn in a heaven. Do bad deeds, you end up in an underworld. Simple cause and effect related to the afterlife.
Okay, standard idea for that era. How did it change?
Later, the understanding deepened. Karma wasn't just about heaven or hell, but about the specific circumstances of your next human life. Why are some people born rich, healthy, intelligent, and others poor, sick, or struggling? Karma became the explanation for those differences within human existence itself.
So it shaped your future human condition directly.
Exactly. And some texts paint a pretty grim picture of rebirth in lower realms, like the animal realm.
How so?
One text describes it as a vicious circle. Animals are just driven by instinct, preying on each other. There's no opportunity for righteous living, no chance to build up good karma. So it's incredibly difficult to get back to a human birth from there.
That's quite a stark view. It really emphasizes the value of a human life for spiritual practice.
It does, and it leads to another question, right? If karma is so powerful, how did Gautama himself break free and become a Buddha? He must have had past karma too.
Good point. How did later traditions explain that?
That's where the stories of the Bodhisattva come in the Buddha in his previous lives. Texts like the Jatakas tell tales of him practicing virtues, these perfections, or parami's generosity, patience, wisdom, effort, and so on, over countless lifetimes.
So his Buddhahood was the result of immense positive karma accumulated over ages.
Yes, fueled by his aspiration to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings. It framed even the ultimate spiritual achievement within the law of karma.
But then there's another twist, isn't there? About karma needing something else to actually ripen.
Ah, yes. A very important theoretical development later on. The idea that karma alone isn't enough to cause rebirth. It needs klesha.
Klesha.
Those are the mental afflictions,
Yeah.
like ignorance, craving, hatred.
Exactly. Karma is like the seed, but klesha are like the water and soil needed for the seed to sprout into a new life.
So what's the implication of that?
It's huge. It means if you can destroy the klesha, if you can eliminate ignorance and craving through the spiritual path, then even if you have remaining past karma, it doesn't have the conditions to ripen into a new birth. You don't have to burn off every single past action. You cut the root.
That provides a way out, a practical way to achieve liberation without needing infinite time to purify infinite past karma.
Precisely. A very elegant solution to a potential problem in the system.
Okay, one last area the text touches on, this Atthakavagga section. You described it as possibly older, maybe even a bit radical. Yeah, it's a fascinating part of the Suttanipata collection. These verses seem to come from a group that might have existed alongside, or maybe even before, the main early Buddhist community. They have a different feel.
How so? What's unique about their perspective?
Well, they're critical of clinging to perceptions, to mental constructs, which aligns with other Buddhist ideas, but they also seem to criticize striving for purity, just to get a better rebirth.
Okay, that's interesting.
And even more radically, they seem to reject all striving, even the striving to end existence, the striving for non-becoming, which was a goal in some other paths.
Rejecting all striving, what's left?
It points towards a conception of nirvana as just the complete extinction of all desires, period, including perhaps even the desire for liberation itself.
Wow. That's very absolute. No goals, no striving, just the cessation of desire itself.
It seems that way. The text suggests this perspective even critiques the idea of anupadisa nirvana, the state where nothing, no mental or physical trace remains. This Atthakavagga view might imply something even more complete, or perhaps just differently conceived. A radical letting go of all concepts, even the concept of attainment.
It's a really different flavor, almost paradoxical.
It really is. It shows the diversity even within what we call early Buddhism.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. From the Buddha's own experience with dhyana to the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, the Insight Path, sphere meditation, the evolution of karma, and this unique mystic stream.
It's quite a journey through these ideas. What really stands out is how dynamic it all was. Not one fixed system, but constantly evolving, different strands developing, sometimes maybe even disagreeing.
Yeah, you really get the sense of a living tradition grappling with these huge questions about suffering and liberation. It definitely goes way beyond the simple pop culture ideas of Buddhism, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's much richer, much more complex, and honestly, much more interesting when you dive into the sources like this. You see the debates, the different approaches, the sheer intellectual and spiritual effort involved.
And thinking back on how the Buddha sometimes left questions unanswered, like the ultimate nature of the self, treating them as distractions.
Right, the undeclared points, focusing on the practical path over metaphysical speculation.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? For you, the listener, in our world today, which is just saturated with information, everyone wanting definitive answers for everything, what value might there be in consciously leaving some of the biggest questions open? In focusing less on having all the answers and more on the actual practical work of inner transformation.
That's a really provocative thought to end on. Maybe the deepest wisdom isn't always found in the answers, but in the quality of the questions we live with and the path we choose to walk.